You know, one of the things that happens every time we do a project is at the Calder Foundation and our own archives, we have a full-time team of archivists, we discover new things. Just 3 days ago, I was in our archives and reviewing the papers from the show in '59. There are all these notes, and in the past we had been able to decipher the notes, what sculpture was which note, but there were still these open questions about what could be the sculpture, what could be that sculpture. And we have a few photographs, and when you lay everything out, sometimes you make a discovery like, oh, you can see in the background, in the reflection in the glass, there's another sculpture, and you can see it and figure out. So that also informs us what is the original title for a sculpture. So there's a sculpture called Button Flower from 1959, but it was first shown in that show at MEM in Rio in '59. It was the first exhibition, and it was called Lily. So button flower, lily, it's similar kind of idea, but it's always exciting to find the original information from the moment of its creation. And that just keeps happening. And then when you walk through the show with Camilo and you hear about an artist that was doing something, and the resonance is really, really fascinating. How Calder influenced artists and how Brazil and artists influenced Calder. It's never a linear progression. I mean, it's totally false to say that an artist begins at 0 and goes to 100, and that's exactly how progress happens, right? So every project brings something surprising. You can see how he came to Brazil in '48. He had this surprising experience and this resonance with Brazil, and then he took that energy back. Even in the works that he made here in Brazil, there was a shift. There are different forms, different attitudes. There's a series of works which are horizontal elements that sprout vertical lines like that. They're called vertical out of horizontal, and those begin with Brazil. And some of the works you can identify even by how they're constructed, like obviously he was recycling materials in '48. When he set up his studio here on his first visit, he took some sort of a thicker piece, maybe it was a curved piece of aluminum, and he hammered it flat, so then he could cut shapes out of it to make mobiles. And all of those hammered ones are clearly defined as works made in Brazil. And then he used different colors and so on from his Brazilian experience. But all of that is part of the discovery process. Even now, I'm in my 29th year of research and archives, and there's always something new to learn. You have to kind of look through and decode the connections. Wait, this sculpture was made in 1948. What is the relationship with Brazil? Or it was made in '49. Now he's back in America. And how is Brazil resonating through like a river in his work? These are subtle things. These aren't just overt things that hit you on the head. It takes time to discover them through a process of understanding. Some examples of things that Calder took back to America from his first trip in 1948. I mean, he took samba records home, literally. I mean, he had such an amazing time having fiesta with his friends here. He took that home. There was no such thing as a samba party in New York. And he literally brought the music home and literally had 3 days long samba parties in Connecticut at his home where people were just crashed out on the floor and then eventually would revive and the party would continue again for 3 days. Really amazing. Yeah, Calder wasn't obsessed with happiness. Calder was obsessed with shared human experience. So when he went back to America and brought his samba records, he also brought a challenge, which is, he had already been challenging his community and society, even with his jewelry. He made jewelry which was made even from commercial industrial materials, saying you don't need diamonds, you don't need platinum. You can wear something that's very beautiful and very expressive and very energetic, but it doesn't have to be made out of precious materials. So his work was that way, but also the way he lived was that way. Some of his artist friends would wear suits and ties and dress up like a banker and be a great artist, but they wouldn't live the way that they were expressing themselves. And he just lived that way. He was happy to just be very simple. Pedrosa was a great champion of Calder, but you also have Henrique Minlin, who, was a central force. Not only was it an invitation to come down to Brazil for the first time, but also Minlin acted as Calder's agent, almost like an art dealer. He wasn't an art dealer, but Calder came down, he brought some works with him, and then he made many works here. They were exhibited in Rio and in Sao Paulo. Almost everything was sold. And Calder had never had that experience before. If you have an exhibition in New York and you show 15 objects, maybe 3 are sold, or 4 are sold, or maybe 5 are sold, but you don't sell everything. So that was a dynamic shift in his life. One, being really the first international artist. He was traveling all over the world for projects, for shows, for commissions, and then to have so much success, not just the financial success, but the fact that he was recognized and his energetic genius was recognized at that moment was really moved him, really moved him. Something surprising happened after Calder came to Brazil. You see an explosion of vocabulary that has a direct reference to Calder's work, just using sheet aluminum in a variable sculpture. I mean, these wonderful sculptures that you can collapse and recompose. These have a relationship to Calder's work. And they're unique in their own vocabulary. They're not copies of his work. They're very original, but they spring from this kind of shift. Later he went to Venezuela. In '55, he went to Venezuela, had a major show, a big show, but he still had this very strong relationship with Brazil. Calder is really deceiving because so much has been made about a shape which is suspended and is moving. And the physical attribute is not the work of art. The work of art is the present moment, right now, 2016, not when it was made. And so the physical object is almost like a tool of decoding what is our present experience. So you have a personal experience with his work in your response, reaction, engagement with it, if you open yourself to it. If you keep yourself closed, of course you won't get anywhere. But having reproductions in books of his work creates a misunderstanding about what his work is about. And it's your physical body that has to be with the physical object that creates a dynamic in space, that's the work of art. Not the metal and the paint, and not your body. It's the combination of things together which create, just like a piece of music has to be performed, to be heard, to be understood. Calder's very much that same kind of tradition. It still causes a lot of confusion, even now, of how do you define his work? Because it's not just something you take out of a box and hang on the wall. It's much more dynamic than that. It's a life cycle, really, that doesn't begin and doesn't end. It continues to unfold and will continue to unfold for generations after we're all gone. For those of us who are lucky enough to actually live with one of his great sculptures, over many years you have strange things happen. One of the strangest and more exciting things, they're very subtle. So you'll see a mobile hanging and it's not moving. It's just static in space, it's suspended. And you look away, and when you look away it goes like this, and it shifts. And when you look back, it's moved, but it's not moving. So it is, in a small interval of time, it's changed position, but it becomes static again. From static to static, and you can't understand what's happened in the interval of time. It could be 2 seconds, it could be a minute. But something has occurred which you can't actually register what made the mobile have a different attitude. It's different than if it's just moving, if it's constantly moving or making poetic movement and harmonies. That's a different type of experience. But there's this one almost spiritual thing where you question what was the experience that transpired in a short brief of time, and becomes that questioning thing. It's often a question that doesn't have an answer. I started the Calder Foundation 29 years ago, and one of the main projects of the foundation is to document his work. We have 22,000 works, 22,000 unique works documented. And that's in all media, the jewelry, the drawings, the paintings, and the sculpture. There's a certain sensibility in Brazil, which is you can make do with what you have. So you don't need to go buy something new in the hardware store. Well, you can make something that's now out of service and put it back into service and reutilize it. And that was always part of Calder's sensibility since he was a child, which is you should make something with what you have. Not go search out precious materials, but do something with what's immediately available. A good artist should be able to create something with what's right in front of you. You don't have to wait for a year for something to come from China or somewhere else. You just make with what's right in front of you. And Brazil reminded him about that sensibility. Certainly the recycling of materials, as I was describing before, the hammering of this sheet metal, he could have gone and purchased brand new material, but he wanted to recycle the material that he found. Well, when my grandfather died, he left behind a number of different studios, and his last studio in France was a very large studio that he designed in 1962. And then later in 1970, he built a house next to the studio where my grandparents lived until my grandfather died. And for many years after he died, the family didn't know exactly what do you do with this big property and this great artist, but also no one in the family wanted to live in this place. And eventually, it took about 10 years, but eventually we were able to begin an artist in residence program. I think our best Brazilian artist is Ernesto Neto, who came and really filled the space of the studio with his vocabulary, but also he had a response to the place. He made very kinetic, like not looking like Calder mobiles, but works that were suspended but also moved. So that was one of the shifts for him. And also he started to do works outside, cutting out of steel objects that you put the pieces together that created these outdoor sculptures. There's one in the exhibition upstairs, which is the chair, which is a later reiteration of where that began in Sachet, his first outdoor works. The residency is still evolving. We like to keep it fresh. We used to have 2 artists, one in the first half and one in the second half of the year, and now we have 3 artists per year for shorter periods. It's still 3 or 4 months, but it's, for an artist, it's a big commitment to change your entire life and go live in the country in France for 3 months. It's a great time for introspection. That's what the program is supposed to be, a time for a great artist to make a shift and a change and maybe have an interior dialogue, or maybe have a dialogue with the local French countryside. There's so many things going on. It's a very vibrant place. It's in the Loire Valley in France, and there's a lot going on there. One of the things that he started doing after 1948 was the Figa. And he made so many of these, so many of them. He made brooches, he made suspended objects, he made one for the wall. And you can see those specific things like the Figa, but also even just a general form, which became abstracted. So it might be the leaf of a jacaranda tree. He really liked jacaranda trees, which he became exposed to here. And other, there's one called Ciba, and the other trees that he explored in Brazil. So the natural environment, all of that stuff he took home and regurgitated in an energetic way. This is my 4th trip to Brazil, I think. Yeah. It's really surprising that you just walk down the street and there's this kind of agreement that life is rich. And you don't see that everywhere. That's not understood everywhere around the world. Here it's something special. You see it in such a diverse, there's so many different types of people in Brazil. And Rio is so different than Sao Paulo. I mean, they're such different places. Americans don't really think it's all the same, but they're such incredibly different places, but yet there's still the agreement that life has a richness. And I think that's the thing I like most about Brazil.